Why I brought this up is the fact that where I work at Creative, our database guys were complaining not about the Debian kernel per se, but the wheezy kernel, which is 3.2, and is kind of considered not super great for enterprise database workloads. So yes, Mike.
What is wheezy and a half? Because we had this etch and a half.
Can you move up?
Dab. Hello?
But it's on, right?
What is wheezy and a half? Because we had etch and a half, but then we didn't have backports. So if you're now saying that the wheezy kernel is too old, why are you not using the backports kernel?
Well, that's a good question. So, in general, I think for some people it might be, so there's two things to this, right? First would be, wheezy and half would entail new installation media. So we don't do that with backports officially, at least, as far as I know. The other thing is giving it a bit more official status. So backports is official right now, but I think there are vendors or companies or people who don't really want to run backports on their machines. You could say, and this is part of the conversation, that as soon as Jessie freezes backporting the Jessie kernel is probably good enough because it will be rather stable. So do we really need it? This is actually a good question. So is there any more input on that? Yeah.
So there's two differences that I can identify between backports and a wheezy and a half. One of them is, as you say, perception. If we tell somebody we're running Debian, so actually in Google Compute Engine we offer Debian wheezy images, we offer Debian wheezy backports images because of the new kernel primarily and other performance benefits. People don't know what backports means. It's not obvious. We have to say. Well, the other thing there was security support. So right now we have to say, if you care about performance, use the backports image with the backports kernel. If you care about security, with the security support from the security team, run stable and have bad performance. Also, it would, if we had, the newer kernel in wheezy, it could get both security support and not confuse people.
Right. So, well, as soon as Jessie is released, it would have security support, and if we backport it fast enough, maybe, yeah, please.
Yeah, I was, I think, trying to formulate a response to that, and I think that the question is, what does the security team actually support? Is the security team going to continue supporting the original wheezy kernels at that point, or does it only support the wheezy and a half kernel? And is there a plan to deprecate the older one? Because from the security team's point of view, speaking as a former member of it, it's the manpower there is very limited. As it is, the team relies largely on the kernel team to actually do security work for the kernels. So how do we make that easier, I guess, is the question that springs up for me.
Right, so I don't think anybody of the active security team is here. And
No. Yeah, I think, what?
Sorry?
Or the kernel team.
Or the
Kernel team, right. Yeah.
I think
Make all the decisions on their behalf right now.
No.
if we do use the Jessie kernel as the basis for this, that'll make the security support a lot easier because there'll be fewer based source trees to work from, and only any differences in the backporting would make that any harder. It's also, if the upgrade from standard wheezy kernel to the upgraded kernel is harmless enough to users, which is not a guarantee, I would care less about deprecating the old one, but if we start with the wheezy kernel, the Jessie kernel, it's not as much of a burden as otherwise.
Okay. Any more? You want to follow up on that? No. Right. Yeah, that's a good question. I think my gist would be that the security team shouldn't get a lot of more put on top of it. So we probably need somebody to maintain the wheezy and half kernel, whereas the wheezy kernel should certainly still be supported security-wise. I think just deprecating it would not be a great idea. So, I mean, I'm not sure how everybody else is feeling, but so we would need to have additional people to do that. I or some of my colleagues might be interested in stepping up to that. We are just looking at how is the general interest. I mean, if everybody says, you know, backport's fine enough, we don't know. So this was kind of one of the reasons I wanted to have this conversation, right? So would it make sense? Yeah, Holger.
I think we could also just marketing or name a release based with VZ backports as VZ and a half, because then the security support backports gets us from with new upstream versions. So,
But just for the kernel, you mean?
just for the kernel, yeah.
And well,
What
there's
else? What else do you want in a half release? Because you will always increase the load on the security team, because you will always need to support both versions.
Right. So, well, if the wheezy, I mean, you already have to support wheezy and Jesse, at least for the wheezy timeline, right? For the support, there's already 2. And then it would be more or less like a backport into wheezy and a half. So the hope is that the security team doesn't have a lot of extra effort. And somebody else would take the Jesse security supported kernel and upload that to wheezy and half.
If you take, if you really release and a half and get them 3.16, you will need to support 3.16 for 2 years. If you just take the kernel, say the backports kernel, and then later use upgrades to 3.18, you don't have to support 3.16 so long.
But
That's what I mean
but wait, Jesse will be 3.16. So
no, I was in the VZ and a half case.
yeah, but we would take the wheezy kernel. We would take the Jesse kernel, right? Okay, so that's of course one of the like. Should we use the Red Hat Enterprise kernel? Should we use the upstream kernel? Should we use the unstable kernel? But I think, for me personally, I think sensible would be to take the Jesse kernel, which would be frozen anyway, and just get security support and put those back into wheezy, right? So that would be not so much effort, I think. So you want to say something?
Taking, if what I think Holger was suggesting would, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, you were suggesting that we sort of, for wheezy and a half, we on an ongoing basis track the backports kernel, or just call that the backports kernel wheezy and a half. The big problem there is security. So for example, right now in backports, if there's a security bug in the stable kernel, it's fixed pretty quickly. If there's a security bug in backports kernel, it can linger for days to weeks, depending on. I mean, they do try to update it pretty quickly in a case of a security issue, but it's a best effort matter. Whereas with the security team, they are very good at being fast. So with if we want to ensure that wheezy and a half is at least close to that fast, maybe with a bit more lag time, having something that's much closer to Jesse's kernel from the same source tree even is going to be less disruptive to that effort than a moving target that doesn't have any security team focus on it, even in Jesse.
And I guess, but okay, also no backports maintainer here, but I think the general gist would be that wheezy backports would not get anything beyond the Jesse kernel, I guess. I mean, because then testing's frozen, right? So it stays there, and as soon as Jesse's released, there would be Jesse backports, but wheezy backports would still pull from Jesse. So I think at least wheezy backports will not get anything beyond 3.16. That's my understanding. Does anybody have other information? But I think that's so. In general, the backport, it would basically be the same thing, I would say. And then the point about security is, of course, that right now maybe the security is not so great, but as soon as Jesse's frozen and or almost released, the security team will support it. So there might actually be the question of timing, of course, right? So wheezy and half, what does that mean? We are maybe 1/3 into the lifetime of wheezy now, I think, or almost 1/2. So we would have to do it towards the end of the year, I would say. So after the freeze is useful, so we have the kernel, but there might be a window. I'm not sure where the security team is not yet supporting the Jessie kernel, and maybe it's useful to wait with the possible wheezy and half until it's actually security supported. Or we could say, well, we will put in the extra effort for a while and then just pull from the security team. I'm not sure. I mean, that's two possibilities. I mean, or does anybody have any input on the specific timing? I mean, I think, so wheezy was released in early May 2013. The Jessie freeze will be in early November. So if we think about a Jessie release, well, I don't know, in the late first or second quarter of 2015, that would mean that wheezy will be supported until the late first or second quarter of 2016, right? Am I getting this right? Right. So that would mean late 2014, I guess, as a half time of wheezy, which kind of comes together with the Jessie freeze rate. So anybody have any input on that kind of specific timing? Is that, say, we should do it after the Jessie release or earlier, or not really? Okay. So the other thing is, of course, what should be included in wheezy and half. I mean, we talked about the kernel now. Is there any interest in also, well, I think if you backport the kernel, you also have to possibly backport a couple of kernel-related things which have kernel modules, and maybe their interface changes like the RBD. We came up with a couple of things. I'm not sure I have them right now. I mean, the RBD was the one that we came up with, which is quite high profile. There might be a couple of others. Pacemaker, I'm not sure. The other question is anybody interested? So, okay, so if, say, we are interested in working on that side, and there is interest in Debian in general, so or maybe does the stable release manager want to say something first? You're not going to comment, okay. So if we say, okay, we will put the effort in, but we will consider ourselves only really interested in kernel. Is anybody interested in the graphics stack? So having a newer graphics stack, because we had that in etch and, no, was this, etch and half. Also had a new graphics stack, I believe. I don't see that, so maybe that works well enough for everybody.
Maybe they could just upgrade to Jessie.
Or maybe they could just upgrade to Jessie, yeah. It's true. So it might be more of a headless server kind of thing. Yeah.
We start getting bug reports in Tails about graphics drivers that are not working so well on wheezy and would be solved with the graphics stack in Jessie. So I'd be interested in seeing Xorg backports or in wheezy in a half, but that's...
You don't have the manpower.
Yeah, quite some work.
Okay. You? Yeah.
I'm not sure I understood. Did you say that Tails already does that? Has the Xorg backport? Okay.
No, there are bug reports which would have been fixed by an Xorg backport. But, and how fast would Tails go to Jessie, you think, after? So also not really, I mean, it would be useful to at least some derived distributions apparently, right? Okay. So any other, yeah.
Yeah, there's also a few other minor packages that are related to allowing the new kernel to perform fully or fixing performance-related bugs at the hardware-related layer, such as, for example, Wheezy's IRQ balance. So the newer kernel supports multi-queue networking in VerdeoNet, which is relevant for our environment. And however, IRQ balance in Wheezy cannot effectively set IRQ affinity, so we've been having to do it manually in a startup logic that we've added. The wheezy backports in Jessie version is totally fine. There was a bug in the old version, so a few random packages like that may be worth considering as well, even though it's not a strict kernel dependency.
Any other input? Comments? Okay, so maybe as a quick poll, like, would anybody be interested in actually investing some work into making it happen? Not really. Okay. Well, maybe backports is good enough, right? So, yeah, I wanted to. Was that okay.
The idea of also providing installation media sounded good, but then with the release date of basically a few months before Jessie, it's pointless, basically, I think. It was really different with etch and a half, when there was no backports as well.
It's true, yeah. Okay, I'll write that down. Well then, I guess that was a small session. Because, I mean, or is there any further input? I'm not aware of anything. So it seems apparently that generally it would be interesting, but backports is kind of okay. Not a lot of, maybe somebody will watch the stream and say, hey, I'm super interested, sign me up, and then we will think about it.
I mean, if there are some compatibility issues in stable with newer kernels, those packages could conceivably be fixed in stable as well.
Right, but there's also the thing that if it's so incompatible that it doesn't work with the wheezy kernel anymore, the old wheezy kernel, what do you do then? You don't think so?
The case I mentioned would work,
Okay.
but it would fix the new version, so we'd have to see if there's a minimal commit or not.
Okay, then if there's no further input, I think that's it then. I'm sorry.